Welcome to another video from Animation Universal. Today, I'll be sharing the story of a wealthy woman who was tragically murdered 30 years ago. The conviction of a Moroccan gardener in this case turned it into one of France's most enigmatic murder mysteries, sparking numerous theories and debates. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on our fascinating and informative videos. Also, please leave a comment, like and share to support our team. Now, let's get started with the story. 30 years ago, France was shocked by the death of Ki.lled Marshall, a 65-year-old wealthy widow found in her private room at a villa in Côte d'Azur. What initially seemed like a straightforward case evolved into a mysterious and intricate crime, almost like a scene from a detective novel. The Unsolved Murder, Mystery of 30 Years. Ki.lled Marshall, a 65-year-old widow, lived alone in a luxurious villa perched on Mougins Hill, near Cannes, France. On the morning of Sunday, June 23, 1991, Marshall was relaxing by the pool, enjoying her favourite pastime, solving crossword puzzles. Her neighbours, Mr. and Mrs. Costa, called over the fence to invite her to join them for lunch. Marshall happily accepted the invitation and continued enjoying the fresh morning air. By 1:30 p.m, the Costas were waiting, but saw no sign of Marshall. Feeling concerned, they called her home but received no response. Assuming she might have had an unexpected commitment, they decided not to call again. The following day, after receiving concerns from her family, the police quickly arrived at Marshall's residence. Inside, they found no signs of a struggle. Everything seemed undisturbed. However, the only access to the basement was locked from the inside. With permission, the police forced open the door to enter the basement. Behind the door was a folding bed and an iron bar blocking the entry. In the distance, officers discovered Marshall's body near the fireplace in the basement. Initial observations revealed she had suffered severe head trauma, a fractured skull, and other injuries, including a throat wound, a cut on her finger, and multiple stab wounds on her body. The circumstances of Marshall's final moments added a chilling layer to the case. The forensic examination concluded that her death occurred on June 23rd. The locked room mystery. There was a peculiar coincidence the night before the incident occurred. The Moroccan gardener, Omar Radad, had altered his work schedule. On June 23rd, he went to work for a neighbouring household near Madame Marshall's villa. This change in schedule was known only to Radad and Marshall. At the crime scene, the only door to the basement was locked from the outside, implying that the killer had escaped after committing the crime. However, the inner door was also locked. This raises the question: who locked the door from the inside? Was it the victim or the perpetrator? The first hypothesis suggested that the victim herself had locked the door from the inside, barricading it with a folding bed and an iron bar to prevent the killer from returning. While this theory seemed plausible, it implied that Marshall had essentially trapped herself. Given the severity of her injuries, it seemed improbable that she could have performed such an action. Furthermore, there was no other way out of the basement except through this door, the only entry and exit point. Another possibility was that the killer had locked the door. However, if this were true, how did the perpetrator escape? With only one point of access to the basement, it seemed impossible for the killer to lock the door, position the folding bed and iron bar from the inside, and then vanish without a trace, unless they could somehow disappear into thin air. In their preliminary examination, the police found no evidence of a struggle or ransacking at the crime scene. All valuables, personal items, and belongings were untouched. From these observations, it was deduced that this was not a robbery-murder case. The police did, however, find a wooden object that might have been used to fracture the victim's skull. The primary weapon in the attack, a knife, was notably absent from the scene. Marshall's death was caused by multiple stab wounds to her chest and abdomen. The blood-written accusation. The forensic report revealed that Madame Marshall did not die immediately after the attack, but succumbed to her injuries approximately 15 to 30 minutes later. The estimated time of death was between 11:48 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. This was during the time she had made a phone call to a friend, and when her neighbours, Mr. and Mrs. Costa, called to remind her about their lunch appointment. The most critical piece of evidence in the case emerged when the police discovered 2 blood-written messages on the door leading to the fireplace. The first read, "Omar m'a tué," Omar killed me, and the second, found elsewhere, was an incomplete version of the same phrase, Omar m'a tué. This clue became the focal point of speculation, debate, and controversy. The message written on the door read, Omar m'a tué, which is grammatically incorrect in French. The correct phrasing should have been Omar m'a tué. This discrepancy sparked numerous questions. Could a wealthy, educated woman like Madame Marshall really have made such a grammatical error? Or was the gardener, Omar, merely a scapegoat in a larger conspiracy, convicted swiftly because he was an Arab immigrant? In French, the error m'a tué is not only grammatically incorrect, but also unlikely to be made by someone with formal education. Additionally, the use of uppercase letters in the message raised suspicions. However, the victim's family argued that Marshall often played crossword puzzles and frequently wrote in uppercase letters, making this detail unsurprising. They also noted that she occasionally made spelling and grammatical mistakes. The case's many inconsistencies. Experts analysing the case pointed out that Madame Marshall, being an educated French woman, was unlikely to make such a basic grammatical error. Furthermore, given the victim's painful injuries, why would she write the accusatory message twice? The police noted that Marshall had 15 to 30 minutes before her death, during which she could have tried to save herself. Why then would she assume she was going to die and write, Omar killed me? Additionally, the door where the message was found and the location of Marshall's death were far apart. Why would she drag herself all the way to the door to write the message rather than writing it where she was? At the scene, the police found no blood traces on the floor to indicate that Marshall had moved from one spot to another. The theory that Omar Radad wrote the message was dismissed because, despite having moved to France as a child, he was illiterate. Even if he could write, it was implausible that he would incriminate himself with such a message. Experts also noted that the blood-written message appeared faint, suggesting that the perpetrator might have used their finger dipped in Marshall's blood to write it on the door. However, after thorough analysis and comparison of the blood-written letters with Marshall's handwriting from her crossword puzzles, written in uppercase letters, investigators concluded there was an 80% chance the handwriting was hers. At the time of the attack, Omar claimed he was having lunch alone, but no one could corroborate his alibi. Based primarily on the blood-written message, the police quickly arrested Omar Radad, a gardener who worked part-time for Marshall. Omar, born in Morocco, had moved to France with his family at the age of 8. He regularly worked as a gardener for Marshall every Sunday. However, on the day she was murdered, he was working for a different family. Was the gardener truly innocent? A strange twist emerged when the police tested DNA samples taken from Madame Marshall's blood found on the door and the wooden object used to strike her. The results revealed the presence of a male DNA sample mixed with the victim's blood. However, the surprising finding was that this DNA did not match Omar Radad's. Moreover, despite the numerous injuries inflicted on the victim, Omar showed no signs of any wounds on his body. Investigators also found no traces of blood or fingerprints belonging to Omar on his clothing or in the basement. This strongly suggested that during his time working for Marshall, Omar had never entered the basement. If the gardener was innocent, an unresolved question arises. How could the perpetrator have known about Omar's altered work schedule to plan the murder and frame him? Meanwhile, Omar's alibi that he had returned home for dinner could not be corroborated by any witnesses. According to forensic experts, the crime scene indicated that Marshall likely lingered for at least 15-30 minutes before succumbing to her injuries. This time frame was enough for her to write 2 accusatory messages. After that, she reportedly barricaded the door with a bed and an iron bar to prevent the killer from re-entering. Experts argued that dragging a bed to block the door could not have been done from the outside, making it improbable that anyone else could have staged the scene. This reasoning led to the conclusion that Marshall was alone when she wrote the final messages. During the trial, Omar's defense lawyer argued that there was insufficient evidence to convict him. The police had not found any of Omar Radad's fingerprints at the crime scene or blood on his clothing. Additionally, the kitchen knife presumed to be the murder weapon was never recovered. No witnesses reported hearing any arguments or seeing Omar in the area on the day of the crime. Moreover, the message, Omar m'a tué, is grammatically incorrect in French. The correct phrasing should be Omar m'a tué. This error might have been made by someone with poor French proficiency or a foreigner. However, Marshall was an educated Frenchwoman, making such a mistake seem unlikely. Nonetheless, 2 handwriting experts testified that there was an 80% probability that the handwriting in the blood-written messages belonged to Marshall. Who was the real killer? Madame Marshall came from a modest rural French background, but rose to wealth through her late husband, a prosperous businessman. After his passing, she inherited his entire fortune. In contrast, Omar Radad, born and raised in Morocco, was illiterate and struggled with the French language. Evidence at the crime scene seemed to implicate Radad. Prosecutors and the victim's family alleged he killed her out of frustration after she declined to advance his wages, supposedly due to his gambling problems. They theorized that after Radad fled the basement and locked the door behind him, Marshall, still alive, used her remaining strength to write the blood-smeared messages on the door to name him as the killer. They further argued that she barricaded the inner door herself, fearing he might return. However, Radad consistently denied the allegations, asserting he had no reason to harm Marshall, who had always treated him with kindness. In court, he declared, "I am ready to die for the truth," and recounted a 45-day hunger strike and a suicide attempt by swallowing razor blades. "I swear on my life 7 times that I did not kill Madame Marshall," he pleaded. Supporters of Radad argued that the real killer may have intentionally framed him by writing the messages before fleeing. Despite his protests of innocence, Radad was convicted of murder on February 2, 1994, 3 years after the incident. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Radad appealed for a retrial, citing inconsistencies and oversights in the investigation. The victim's family lawyer stated, "While handwriting experts cannot conclusively identify the author, they do not rule out the possibility that Madame Marshall wrote the messages herself." They argued further, "No new evidence convincingly exonerates Omar Radad, while substantial evidence implicates him. Therefore, we urge the court to deny the request for a retrial." In 2015, advancements in DNA analysis revealed the presence of DNA from 4 unidentified individuals at the crime scene. Among these, 35 DNA markers matched the second blood-written message. Radad's legal team, led by lawyer Sylvie Noakovic, stated, "This DNA undoubtedly belongs to the true killer," emphasizing that it did not match any investigators or known individuals at the scene. Another lawyer argued that this discovery confirmed Radad's innocence and pointed to the involvement of an unknown third party. However, no definitive link was established between the DNA evidence and the perpetrator. The suspicious DNA traces could have been present before or after the murder. Sabine de Granroute, the victim's niece and legal representative for the family, argued that these findings stemmed from contamination due to mishandling of the crime scene and did not conclusively prove Radad's innocence or guilt. The case remains unresolved. For those who support Omar Radad, the misspelling in the blood-written message is proof that it was not authored by Madame Marshall, but by someone framing the gardener. However, Sabine de Granroute countered that her aunt frequently made such spelling errors. The central issue is not a theory of robbery or personal vendetta, but the mystery of the locked door and the blood-written message with the grammatical mistake. Numerous unclear details remain unresolved. When asked for an example of a potential miscarriage of justice, people immediately point to Omar Radad, said Henri Leclerc, the lawyer representing the victim's family during the 1994 trial. Following Radad's conviction in 1994, his legal representatives argued that his only crime was being an Arab immigrant. Although the verdict found Omar Radad guilty, the controversy surrounding the case persisted. The media kept the public captivated with ongoing coverage. Many intellectuals, and even Morocco's King Hassan II, voiced their support for Radad, who continued to assert his innocence. After King Hassan II's intervention and a pardon from French President Jacques Chirac, Omar Radad was released from prison after serving 4 years. However, he remained branded a murderer, as the conviction was never overturned. In September 1998, Omar was released after 7 years of imprisonment. By January 1999, he filed an appeal for a retrial, seeking to restore his honor. On October 17, 2002, the court heard Radad's appeal. However, on November 20, 2002, the court ruled that the evidence presented by the defense was insufficient to reopen the case. As a result, the case was closed permanently. Despite this, debates surrounding the case persist. Omar Radad, now 59, continues to fight for justice and awaits the court's decision on whether to grant a retrial, scheduled for June 2022. Meanwhile, the victim's family maintains their belief in Radad's guilt and opposes reopening the case. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any exciting and insightful content. Thank you all, and see you next time. Goodbye for now.